I'm Levi Turner, and today we'll be talking about rules in Qlik Sense. So to start off, I'm Levi. I'm a senior support engineer here at Qlik. My main focus has been Qlik Sense, and I've been in the company about 3.5 years or so. So the agenda. We're going to go over the concept of rules, sort of explaining what they are, what they mean, go over some tips and tricks, some things that some snags customers and partners interact with and encounter and how to overcome them. Do a live demonstration in an environment I've set up, and then we'll go to a Q&A. With the Q&A, in the past, I don't always get to every question. There generally are quite a few. So it's helpful if you would put your question and then your email address as well. So if there's further follow-up that is needed, that can be done then offline. So the concept of rules and sense. What are rules? How are they constructed? What do they mean? So the technical way of describing it is attribute-based access control. So you've got attributes, and that controls what users can see and or do. So broadly speaking, we have a property, which is a thing, a type of thing, a stream, a user, an app, a node, some sort of thing. We can put a condition on there to describe the thing, so a certain type of app, a certain type of user, a certain type of stream. And then we can use another resource, so another type of thing, so a type of app and a type of user. So certain types of users should see certain types of apps. And we have an action, read, delete, update, etc. And we'll go over that in a bit more detail in a bit. But those are the core concepts there. You should be able to describe the rule as allowing the requester, whether it's a user, whether it's a node, in the example of load balancing rules, to do some sort of action to some sort of thing, provided it meets the conditions. And it's important to be able to articulate what you want to accomplish in the rule, to be able to describe it in plain English. You want users who are part of a certain group to see a certain stream. You want users to be able to see apps that belong to that are owned by colleagues that are in the same AD groups. Something like that. You need to be able to articulate exactly what you want to do, because otherwise you can't really write a rule for it. You also need to have some sort of selectable attribute, and we'll go over what options are available here in a second. But you need to be able to have a way of describing the type of thing you're trying to do. Access is granted, not denied. So if a consequence of this is if a user can see something and they shouldn't, that means there's a rule that's giving them that access. So you'll need to audit that, whatever that is that the user can see, and see what rule is providing them access and make sure that the rule is written to exclude that. So there's no denial rules presently in Qlik Sense. You can't put exceptions explicitly. You can craft a rule, and we'll go over actually an example of this. You can craft a rule with exceptions, but there's nothing in the product just yet to do that. Also, access is additive. So if you have two rules, one gives access to A, one gives access to B, the user can see A and B. The sort of meaningful consequence of this is that there's no harm within reason to having many security rules. As long as you don't have a couple hundred. At a scale, there may be concerns, but especially when testing things out, breaking rules up into different bits and bots makes it a little bit easier to get to the final form. And you can do further refinement down the road, but there's no need to have one rule that does every single thing. So what are rules? We've got a user, we've got the rules engine, and we have things the user wants to see or do or modify or something to. Streams, apps, stories, data connections, task. And we have some information about the user. They come from a certain user at connector, potentially. They have a certain role assigned in Qlik Sense, potentially. They have certain custom properties assigned, potentially. And if there's a user directory connector, they have attribute information. So example like AD or LDAP or ODBC source. You have some information to describe the user. And you have things on you have custom properties and resource properties on the things they want to see. So apps belong to a stream, for example, or tasks belong to apps. And we'll cover this hierarchy in a bit, but we have ways of describing them. Load balancing rules, which are rebranded sync rules. So hopefully you guys aren't on sync persistence. but we have the ability to pin applications to nodes based on properties. So we can do things like send sales and finance apps to certain nodes or servers and sort of send back-end reloads to different servers. One consequence of this, right, is that you can have a single virtual proxy that has a variety of engines attached to it, and you as the administrator control which server delivers the application. So it allows the administrator to define consumption while presenting a unified face to the customer and the end user. So rather than having secondary nodes for development, you can have one virtual proxy and handle all of this inside Sense with rules. There's no need to have different URIs or URLs for people to remember. So same principle here. We have custom properties, resource properties on the apps, and we have custom properties and resource properties on the servers. These principles will also apply to the new multi-node architecture. They're going to be distribution rules in that product to be able to define where to send things. So this principle is going to get more and more important in the product. We also have license rules in the product. This applies to user access passes, login access passes, as well as the new subscription analyzer and professional access passes. Same principle applies. We've got information about the users. We want to give them a license. So broadly speaking, the syntax, what is it? You have a set of core things that are rule. The first one being the filter. You need to narrow the scope. You need to say, what is this applying to? In the example here, we have app_star. That means all apps. And we've got some conditions. So user.group. We're saying that users who belong to a group can do something to apps. With conditions, you can have operators like and or. Those are relatively straightforward. The like operator allows you to use wildcards. So if you want to pattern match against stuff, especially when the information from AD is not perfect, you can do a wildcard match. We'll actually cover a scenario here, but the not operator is quite helpful as well. And then we have the matches operator, which is a little bit less used. I'll show an example using load balancing rules, but this allows you to use regular expressions, which if you have exposure to that, there are certainly use cases where regular expressions and the power of that and the flexibility of that are ideal. And then you have actions, things you want the users or servers or whatever to do, like read, publish, delete, modify, that sort of thing. So let's go over an example of syntax, and this actually is the default rule stream in a Qlik Insight, and it shows a lot of power. It's one of the more powerful rules inside of Qlik. So to start things off, we have the filter. We're saying app star, not app_star, app star, which means we're applying to both app objects and apps, both of which will be pattern matched here. We're given the action of read, so we're saying that users can read apps and app objects. And we have a set of conditions. We basically have two parts here. The first part here, resource.resourceType equals app. So the type of thing we're talking about is an app. And we're saying the resource stream has privilege of read. So we're saying that the user has read access on the stream. Give them read access to the app. I'll show a diagram of inheritance before, but this is a great example of how to inherit rights from one thing to another. The consequence of this is that when you're onboarding customers in a relatively basic site or in users, you give access to the stream and they can automatically see the apps. This rule is the one that's giving them that access. And consequently, if you wanted to have sub-stream level access, you would need to modify this rule and allow an exception in there, which we'll show an example of as well if we have time. The second part is resource.resourceType is app object. So now we're talking about app objects like sheets, stories, bookmarks, that sort of thing. And we're saying the resource, which is an app object, is published. That happens when you publish an app to a stream. And the resource object type, so the type of app object, is not app_app script, which is the load script. There's documentation on this, but it's just the load script. And the object type is not the load model, so the data model. They can see everything in an application that's published, every app object that's published except those two things. Provided that they have read access to the app and to the stream. And that allows you to inherit rights to the app object from the app from the stream. Let's do another example, this time using load balancing. So we've got we have two rules. We could actually combine them into one, and I've done that in the demo. But we have the filter of apps, so app_star, action of load balancing. We're doing the condition of the node at node type, which signifies it's a custom property, equals production. The reason why we might want to use this rather than the node type in the configuration of a node is that a node type of production disables app creation regardless of security rules. So this allows a little more flexibility and doesn't interfere with other things. And we're saying that we're going to load balance all apps to all nodes that have this custom property, provided that the resource, which is an app, its stream is not empty. This bang or exclamation point, that's the not operator. So we're saying the resource has a stream. That means it's published. The consequence of this is we're sending all published apps to these nodes. Rule 2, we have app_star load balancing node type equals development. So we have another custom property assigned to the servers, and the resource stream is empty. So this is unpublished applications. We're sending unpublished applications to a particular node or set of nodes. You can have all of the nodes assigned in the virtual proxy, but when the user clicks on the app, it goes to a particular server. Tips and tricks. I mentioned it before, and this is the diagram, and this is extremely helpful to leverage in security rules, but there are hierarchies. There are certain things that are assumed at the API layer. So the first one being that apps belong to streams. It makes some sense, but you can leverage, like in the stream rule, the rights from the stream to the app. Any of these things that are in hierarchical relationships you can inherit from. Additionally, app objects belong to apps. So the stream rule does a good job of giving it in the demo, but tasks belong to apps. So you can easily write a rule to say you should see all tasks associated with apps that you can see, rather than giving people full access to all the tasks. The sort of use case here would be like a departmental administrator and a person who has access to the QMC, but only for a particular stream or set of streams, and they need to have pseudo administrative rights, so they need to see all the tasks. Another tip, if you have this type of configuration, is session attributes. This is an example from SAML. If you can use session attributes, this is great because it's fundamentally tying authentication and authorization together. It also doesn't persist information in the repository, which at scale can be a little more efficient. And it also allows you to keep the data that you have where it is, right? You don't need to set up a separate UDC to bring in this information if your IDP, in the example of SAML, already has this information. So this is a screenshot of setting that up. And if you'll notice here, there's a slight difference than what we might have seen before, which is we have user.environment.whatever. That's signifying that we're using session attributes. And I'll do a quick demo of this as well if we have time. But if you have SAML set up and your IDP can pass along these session attributes, this is a great way of using Qlik Sense. It's definitely efficient at scale. Same principle applies to ticketing, web ticketing. And on the left here, we have the JSON representation of a web ticket. So we have user directory, ID, and then we have some attribute information, and the same principles apply. Some gotchas. Disable, don't delete. Especially with the default rules, please don't disable them. You need to have something to revert back to. You can always create some rules, play around, and then have something to go back to. And additionally, in the example of the stream rule, it has a lot of power. So it's helpful to have that there as reference, even if you want to customize it. It's almost always app objects. App objects are a bit of a pain. So scenarios where users can't publish and replace, but they can publish, that's app objects. If they duplicate an app and don't get the load script, also app objects. There are a lot of scenarios where the coverage of app objects can cause impairments. Custom properties can't be applied to everything. that can't be applied to things like triggers and app objects. These are common sort of gotchas when setting up stuff. Triggers, unfortunately, there's no hierarchical relationship at the API layer between a trigger and a task, so you need to write rules around that behavior. Additionally, it's ideal to separate out the create action. The reason for that is that you can't really put a condition on the create action. You can't say you can create an app that has a custom property because the app can't have a custom property until it exists. Additionally, I mean, you can do things like you can only create apps that have a certain naming convention, but this is not intuitive to the end user, so it's far more ideal to just allow unfettered access to create if you want the user to be able to create things, because putting restrictions on there can be a little non-intuitive or non-functional if you're putting conditions on it. Practically for you guys, what does this mean in terms of implementation? You just have to test. You have to test out things, and you should ideally have a testing environment. Not every customer is as fortunate to have that, but you do need to find a way to validate the security rules in your environment, whether that's setting up a header virtual proxy, which is not ideal long term because it's not a particularly secure type of authentication, or test users in AD or SAML. Finding some way of testing out things is ideal. Additionally, using the audit functionality in the QMC, which is quite powerful. It does allow you to figure out why a user can see something. Why a user can't see something is it's a bit different because it audits what is what is possible, not what is not possible. So it also will show you if rules are disabled that would otherwise grant access or whether they're invalid rules. It'll provide a lot of insight, and we'll, if you have time and it comes up, we can sort of go over the audit functionality. Now let's get to the interesting part, which is going to be demos. Let's go ahead and first advance the slide a little bit, and I can make this a little higher, but I have an example on the desktop of the server, but this is our user base. We've got a set of users. We have some locations, which I'm not using here, but if we have questions, we can try to cover them if we have time. We have roles. It's helpful here in the sense that we have roles that are roughly hierarchical. Consumers can do the least, developers more, administrators even more, and then we have this executive role. We have pretty good information on groups, but not perfect. We have people who have the executive role who aren't in the executive group, like Sam here, and a few others. We have pretty good information. Mercy over here does not have a group. This is not dissimilar to a lot of ADs and a lot of LDAP structures where we don't have perfect information, but we have pretty good information. So we need to make the best of what we have. So first, minimize that. The first thing to keep in mind is that we've disabled a couple of default rules here. We've disabled the create app objects published app rule. This is a default rule that allows users to create app objects like sheets, stories, and bookmarks on published apps. We're going to handle this separately. We've disabled the stream rule, which we covered earlier, and we've also disabled the stream everyone. So we don't want to see the everyone stream, basically. So let's get into what we do have. Let's filter on custom. And let's do disabled as no. So these are all our custom created rules. They can roughly be cut into a couple of categories. We have sort of front-end rules whose context is both, and we have back-end rules whose context is QMC. So let's start out with the front-end rules. So we have a rule here to provide stream access, and this is a little different than how you might write rules using the GUI. And there are pros and cons of each approach, but the core concept here is that we're saying that users should be able to read streams provided that their group equals the resource, which is a stream's name, or their role. And that allows us coverage for these executives that some have the executive role but not are in the executive group. So we have coverage here. Basically, if the user is a part of a group or has that role, they will see that stream. And let's demo what that means on the front end. Let's take a example. Let's do Kyle. They are in the IT group. So, and highlight, Kyle's in the IT group, and they have the developer and administrator role. let's go ahead and log in as Kyle. And what I have here is iPortal, which is a tool created by the enterprise architecture team. It's not particularly secure, but it does great for demos. It allows you to emulate certain users. And it also, if you want to fiddle with the innards, you can set up your own custom users, your own custom attribute information, like I have here. So let's log into the hub as Kyle. And when we logged in, we can see the work stream because they have the ability to create apps. And we can see the IT stream. And so we have 3 apps in the IT stream. That's all well and good. The one thing I did mention there, though, is that we have customized the stream rule. So we've customized the stream rule and done in it basically substream level access. We've said everything in this rule is exactly the same except for this part. What we're saying here is that the user can see the app if they can see the stream, as long as the resource, which is an app, doesn't have a custom property assigned, so it's empty. So let's go ahead to the IT stream and let's apply the custom property. And let's refresh on the front end. And Kyle now sees 2 apps rather than the 3 they were seeing before. To go back over to this security rule, though, so we've got a restriction there. We also need to have a rule that provides access. So what we've done here is written a secondary rule. And there are many ways to do this, but we're basically saying that users can see apps that have the custom property restricted, provided they are in the executive group or have the executive role. So let's try to find a user who is an IT executive, and we can find Sam. Sam here is an IT executive, and if we were to log in as Sam, Sam sees the CIO IT management application, as well as the executive stream, because there's an executive stream here. So we've covered exceptions. We've covered the stream rule that's providing stream access. Let's go ahead and do a quick demo of attributes, of session attributes. So we have here a very similar rule as the one we had before, except that we're saying the user.environment.group. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to inject in a ticket. Don't pay attention too much to this tool. This is just a tool to interact with the APIs. You can use Postman or some sort of robust integration, but I just want to get a ticket. So I'm getting a ticket. Let me log out as Sam. Let me paste the ticket in here to the URI. And let's log in. I'm now logged in as attribute user, and we can see here from the JSON structure here that they have the group of sales. We would expect them to be able to see the sales group, which they can. They can open the app and do what they need to do. They don't have an access pass, which we can cover later. Let's go to round out the security rules. Let's do I need to log out as attribute user. I should have used a incognito mode browser window. Let's go back to as administrators. We covered the front end. Now let's cover the back end. So we have a rule here, which we don't really need to demo, but it's a good example that we're basically providing root admin-like access. So they have all actions to all things in the QMC, provided that their role is administrator. There's some minor deltas. The admin roles have embedded assumptions elsewhere, like an ability to create data connections, the ability to see the monitoring app stream. But on the back end, you can emulate the content admin or root admin type role with attribute information from your AD. Let's get to the more interesting ones, and we have several of these rules, which indicates they're doing a fair bit of things here. So we have these developers. So let's first get a developer. Let's go to iPortal, find a developer. Let's do Rebecca's an administrator, so that's not a great example. Let's find Teresa there. Teresa is a developer in the HR group. Log into the QMC here, and we can now see 3 apps and 3 tasks. How is that possible? So the first one is we've given users who have the role of developer access to the relevant QMC sections, so they can see the apps and tasks section. Also, if you notice here, all of these rules are set to both. That means that the users can see the same apps in the QMC that they could see in the hub. So we don't need to fiddle around with how they can see the apps. What we have done, though, is that we've set up separate rules relating to task. We're saying that developers can see all reload tasks associated with apps that they have read access to. So if you go to the task section, they can see 3 reload tasks. And we've also provided the ability to create tasks. Again, it's ideal to separate out create actions, so they can go into the app section, highlight an app, and do reload now. If this rule was disabled, they would have problems with that. And we can show you that briefly. Now they don't have that ability. We've then created a separate rule to give access to all of the triggers. Again, I mentioned before that there's no relationship between a trigger and a task, unfortunately, in Qlik. So we're giving them the ability to create, read, update, and delete all triggers. So they can go into a task, find the trigger, set up one, click apply, and that works perfectly fine. So that covers broadly the backend, and let's actually cover this guy here. This guy here gives the ability to create, update, and delete all apps and app objects. So the benefit of this rule is this really does allow ability to publish and replace. So they can see all the app objects they need to see, and they can also update all of those app objects, as well as updating the apps and potentially deleting apps. This isn't necessary, but if you had a sort of departmental administrator, you'd want to give them the ability to delete apps as well. And we notice here we did not have the read access. So we're not giving them access to all apps. We're giving them access to only the apps they otherwise have read access to. So this is the security rules we have set up. Let's go to the load balancing rules, because those can be a bit more of a pain for some environments. Let's actually maximize the screen to make it a little easier. So the first thing we've done is we've disabled the default rule. The default rule says that we will load balance all apps to all non-central nodes as long as the app does not belong to the monitoring app stream. So if you have problems reloading an application, reloading a monitoring app on RIM nodes, this is the culprit. But we've created 2 different rules here, just to show examples. So this is what I covered earlier, that we have custom properties assigned to nodes, and we're assigning published apps to production nodes and development apps to development nodes. So let's go ahead and preview this and see what it looks like. And we can see here there's not much load balancing going on because we only have 2 unpublished apps, test app and RIM2 and customer experience 1. But this this is an example of a fairly robust rule that a lot of customers either have implemented or would like to implement, because this allows the ability to control things as an administrator, allow developers to do developer things, but not spill over to the consumption activity. I mentioned before about matching, and this is a fairly complex rule. If you don't have an exposure to regular expressions, this may not be super meaningful, but this just shows the power of the matching operator. So what we're saying is that nodes that have the name of rem1 will get apps that match this regular expression. And then what this regular expression means is that apps whose GUIDs start with 0 through 8 will go to rem1. Apps whose GUIDs start with A through Z or 9 go to rem2. I've sort of crafted this a little bit to make it a little bit more obvious that things are going on. This is more ideal in larger environments because on a short time horizon, you don't expect perfect normal distribution, but over a long time scale, you would get normal distribution of the app GUIDs. So this just shows the power of the matching operator, which can be useful in some contexts. So at this point, I think I've demoed most of the key attributes that I have set up so far. Let's go ahead and go to the question and answer section and see about the questions that you guys have. So we have a question here about rules that send tasks to scheduler nodes. So scheduling back in reloads, they operate off of load balancing rules. So load balancing rules define which schedulers will do things. So when a task is activated, the master scheduler is going to say which schedulers have engines that have these apps, either app or apps. It'll find those apps, or those engines rather, and then pick the least busy one at that point in time. So if you want to pin reloads against backend nodes, you'll need to do it by load balancing rules. Load balancing rules you can come up with using custom properties. If you'd like to use that, you can use it by stream level to say if an app belongs to a certain stream, send it to a certain node. There are many ways of accomplishing this. Custom properties are perfectly fine, but they have scalability concerns, right? If you require a setting of a custom property to pin it to a certain node, that means that every new app is going to have that custom property, right? It's ideal to use stuff like streams if you can, but that may not be possible or won't give you enough granularity, so custom properties can be used. There's a question here about is there documentation on security rules for common implementations? So in this presentation, and it'll be included after we're done here as well, in the recap on our community site, there's a link to a variety of security rule examples which show the power of rules, but also in our help. And this honestly is the quickest way for me to get there. There are quite a few examples that are actually quite powerful, which do show sort of common customer scenarios. This one is pretty robust, but there are a lot of examples on help of how to do this. There's a question about how to get access to iPortal. So iPortal is just going to be on GitHub or branch. I typically search iPortal Qlik Sense. And let's agree to this terms of service for Google since I'm coming from a Swedish IP. But this will take you to the relevant pages, but it's on GitHub. It's created by the enterprise architecture here at Qlik. I believe the Americas team primarily. There's a question about the new functionality in April, which allows the ability to publish from the hub. So let's go ahead and go to the hub and see the behavior here. So the question is whether there's specific rules that need to be in place. There are not. So The ability to publish from the hub is functionally the same as publishing from the QMC. Just make sure that the context of the rule is set to both. So you can be able to select a stream here, and you can publish to that stream. So this user doesn't, while they're a root admins don't have elevated rights in the hub especially, so they can publish to the streams that they can see.
Okay, Levi, we have time for one more question.
So there's a question here about hiding specific sheets for an app or group of users. So I don't have an example handy, but fundamentally what you're going to do is want to customize the stream rule or its analog that you have set up. So the same principle that we have over here. And let's close out of this. So we have this part here. We would put a restriction here as well. We would say and resource dot something, so like dot name. I'm doing a not like because it's ideal in this scenario to do like operator, like. So this would say that if the name has, the name of the object has restricted in it, that users won't be able to see it, and then you can create a separate rule to provide access to those restricted sheets. It's ideal to use things like a naming convention or something in the description, so resource description, to be able to hide things. Ideally a bit of both, so users don't accidentally create something that they would not be able to see, because you would be able to create it, but you wouldn't be able to see it, so you'd create a sheet and then it would go away. So there's a lot of other questions in here which we haven't had time to get to. Can we make sure to include email addresses so I can follow up specifically offline? I want to make sure that follow-up is possible.
All right, thank you very much. We hope everybody enjoyed this session. Thank you to Levi for presenting. We always appreciate getting experts like Levi to share with us. We've got a legal disclaimer for you and a thank you screen. So thank you once again and have a great rest of your day, everybody.